Welcome to this week's episode of the Human Enhancement Podcast. I'm really excited to have Serge Faguet, who's a super experienced entrepreneur, but also one of the most, I would say, rigorous biohackers that have really come and published his results. So if you haven't seen his blog posts yet, he's spent $200,000 to just track essentially, the whole plethora of biometrics that one could track, and has been optimizing and experimenting with a number of interventions. And I'm excited to have you here to talk about it. Welcome, Serge. Really awesome to have you here.
Cool. Thank you, Geoff. I'm excited to talk to you guys about this.
Yeah. So before getting into the biohacking side, I think you have a very interesting entrepreneurial story. So you founded a couple companies, including Ostrovoc, which is I'm not familiar with the Russian market too much, but it's like essentially the Russian Airbnb type of
I would say more
business.
of an Expedia slash Booking.com.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've been an entrepreneur for a while. I started a couple companies. I started TalkBox, which was an early video communication player that Sequoia funded, and that then Telefonica acquired. And then after that started Ostrovoc, which is now the largest online travel company in Russia. It's doing like $500 million in gross turnover.
Yeah.
It's EBITDA profitable, got 400 people working on there. And now I'm working on a new AI company in Silicon Valley that's still stealth, so we aren't quite ready to talk about it yet.
Yeah.
But
We'll
soon.
have you back on when you're ready to launch. So in the midst of building these technology companies, how did you get into biohacking? Because I think, a lot of my conversations, a lot of engineers or people with engineering training tend to gravitate towards applying some of those principles of the human body. And that's how personally I got involved and interested in biohacking. Curious to hear your journey.
So partially, I grew up on science fiction. My family are all engineers. My grandfather was a famous scientist in the Soviet Union. And so when you grow up on science fiction, you kind of expect that a lot of these interesting technologies to do with biohacking will happen at some point. And really, the way I started thinking of this isn't, so a lot of people seem to start from, I want to extend my life. And I actually started from, essentially, I want an unfair competitive advantage. So this is a phrase that used to be more popular in Silicon Valley until it became a bit politically incorrect. But, every VC used to want, hey, what's your unfair competitive advantage?
Right.
And I thought, hey.
Is it unfair? Is it not PC now? Is everyone trying to play nice? Is that
I
really
guess
true?
now it's just, I guess now it's just competitive advantage.
Okay.
But it seemed like, everything that we do in our lives on a daily basis, whether it's to do with social life or with making money or with everything else, it's dependent on our own internal mental states. So it's dependent on the energy we have today, on not being sick today, because if you're sick, you cannot do things very well. You cannot think, you don't have the energy to go anywhere and do anything. On confidence, on, being happy and in a good mood and not being depressed on a particular day. And all those things are ultimately biochemical. So it seems like they have some basis in external reality, but they really don't. These are mental states. And I started out kind of wanting to get more of all of this because it helps me become a better business person and progress towards my goals. And what I do now, for those that haven't read the articles, is basically, so what I did is I optimized sleep, I optimized my nutrition, so things like keto, sugar, fasting, all the things that you guys are really fans of, which is great. Exercise, like high intensity interval training, mental health, so meditation, I do a lot of and love it. Psychotherapy, I think, is one of the best ways to spend money, and radical transparency. So in my article, I do things like talk about, my sex habits. And I think actually a lot of mental health, which is a large portion of your overall health, is about being true to yourself and not feeling constrained by kind of social pressures, I guess. And then I also, the thing that people are usually more excited about is that I did thousands of tests. I take about a dozen different prescription drugs, even though I don't meet the clinical criteria for
Right.
any of them, although I do this under medical supervision, and a lot of supplements. So some of the more colorful things I do are hormone optimization, antidepressants, lithium, MDMA as a tool to become more extroverted, which actually has had a wonderful effect on my ability to connect with people, which we can talk about.
That's
And
interesting. So how'd you?
yeah.
So obviously you went from. I think most people would say yes, all the goals of not just living longer, but being more productive, especially in a world that's more and more cognitive focused. That are optimizing our mind is super important. So how did you go from yes, that is a good idea, and starting to dabble with meditation and fasting and diet and exercise to all right, I'm gonna take a bunch of crazy compounds and pseudo illegal compounds and illegal compounds to optimize myself. Like, what was that journey?
So it was a journey. I think the important thing is to start with the why. So I feel like in general, the thing I really want long term is to kind of go into the singularity, merge with artificial intelligence, become a post-human, I don't know, post-human god compared to where we are
Today, yes.
now. And that's always been my dream. And I find that the value in that is so significant that I decided I really want to invest more and more time and resources into finding ways to work better. So I have more resources that I can invest into that, as well as to improve my health. And it's been a journey of over about 5 years. And I just started doing things very gradually. I mean, this is going to sound weird from a guy who takes all this stuff, but I'm pretty paranoid. So even with Metformin, which is a very benign drug,
Yeah.
I actually, before taking it, I asked probably 4 or 5 different doctors who didn't know about each other, whether this was okay and reasonable. And I still kind of thought about it for several months
Yeah.
before I started doing it. So this all kind of grew over the years, and together with doing a lot of testing and seeing some results. So I shared some of this in the article.
Yeah.
For example, my body fat went from about 27% to about 10%. And that's, you look into the mirror and you feel better, you feel more energetic.
Yeah, you see like the
It's
six pack abs. I mean, I think that's a massive
yeah,
transformation.
it's
Massive.
very,
And this is probably done on a DEXA scan, right? So this is like a proper body composition test.
actually, so I only partially did those on a DEXA
Okay.
scan because we didn't have regular access. We mostly
Okay.
did it with calipers
Okay.
because it was just hard to go to a facility, which
Yeah.
isn't an exact method, but if you do the same thing, you can kind of see the directional trend reasonably well.
Yeah.
So, and then occasionally I would discover some very interesting new thing. Like I have an MTHFR mutation, which makes my B12 metabolism much worse. And when I started taking large doses of B12, I just felt like my anger management issues dissipated and life just became kind of better. And I was like, wow, if I can just, do a silly genetics test
Right.
and, take a supplement and in this targeted way, and I also saw some objective metrics like homocysteine going way down.
Right.
When you see that really motivates you to say, okay, what else can I do? And then I started over time meeting some of the very sophisticated doctors in the space, and they asked me not to name their names because obviously, what we do is unorthodox.
Right.
But they're guys who are very well respected and known in the space with excellent education, etc.
Yeah.
And I constantly would ask them, hey, so where can we push the envelope further? So I would come to my psychotherapist and say, I want to never have days of bad mood. Because occasionally, once a month or for a day or two, you have this like crappy mood and you don't want to do anything. And you
Right.
think, hey, I optimized my entire days to be more productive. But then I have this crappy day, which I don't enjoy, and where I get nothing done. How can we get rid of those? And we started and kind of escalated. So first, we kind of became much more aggressive with meditation, which helped.
Right.
Then we started doing things like lithium microdoses. And then we went to SSRIs, which, by the way, are just awesome. So, this is not like we do this in a stupid way, but we monitor the markers, we monitor the genomics, and, for my particular profile, it works. It's
Yeah.
important to say, actually, that it's not necessarily going to work for everyone.
Yeah, and
Right?
I think that's a very self-aware and a correct statement. Like, it sounds like you have very, very good professionals helping you walk it through, because, like, as you know, if you're using metformin, you're pushing off. Well, metformin, for the folks that aren't aware of it, is usually used as a diabetes drug. It helps control blood sugar. And I was looking at this as something interesting because in some longitudinal studies, people on metformin, even with diabetes, would live longer than healthy, normal people without using metformin, which is very interesting
Which is
from a
crazy,
longevity.
right?
Yeah, which is crazy, right? It's a sick
Because
person.
diabetes is such a bad disease, right?
Yeah, and so a sick person on metformin lives longer than a normal healthy person, which is interesting, very interesting. But I think some of the downstream things that are somewhat concerning are that it may lower, especially for men, may lower some testosterone production.
Yep.
It might reduce some growth factors, which might not be amenable to certain use cases. But it sounds like you also, have that self-awareness and the education to really understand that, okay, if I'm going to be depressing testosterone in this way, I'm going to sort of buff up on blockers of testosterone. I noticed that you were able to sort of elevate your testosterone levels from, a little bit lower than what you'd wanted to something that's like sort of on the high range of normal, right? So I think it's like you were able to sort of mold all your metrics across hormones, across interventions, across compounds in a way that's very sophisticated.
Yeah, and it's important to say that actually one of the most challenging things today for other, our fellow biohackers, I think, is the monitoring aspect of things and the professional help, because that is very expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, most of the money that I spend is really testing plus doctors.
Right.
Because if you just take Clomid, the thing that I used to improve my testosterone
blocker, right? So it's like estrogen blocker that sort of naturally elevates testosterone.
It's essentially, so this is going to be a bit geeky, but this is a podcast for biohackers, right?
Yeah.
So the way this works is that you have your pituitary gland produces FSH and LH, which are two hormones that are then converted into testosterone, which is then converted into estrogen, which then goes to the pituitary and blocks the production of FSH and LH. And what I had after analyzing this entire cycle, I noticed that my testosterone was kind of, slightly below average, but the FSH and LH precursors were very low. So I started taking a thing which essentially blocks at the pituitary receptors of estrogen, and so it produces more FSH and LH, and in a reasonably safe way, because you're not kind of boosting any portion of the cycle in a crazy way. Right. You just removed your biochemical bottleneck that, for whatever reason you have. And that raised testosterone by about free testosterone by about 81% in 2 months. And it actually, I noticed that was a distinct improvement in my well-being. So I kind of noticed a lot more energy and essentially just better mood, and spent a lot more time looking at girls. But
that's interesting. Yeah, I'm not, an endocrinologist or have looked at the pathways for hormones as deeply as other pathways, but I think that's, that is a very powerful pathway. And I think that my understanding with people that have been playing with testosterone, you definitely feel like a boost of a vigor, right? There's no other way to put it, right? Like that's definitely a huge change.
And again, that kind of thing, I mean, if you manage to improve that kind of thing for yourself, and then it's going to be lifelong that you're going to be able to control this in some way, that is a huge, huge gain to the overall enjoyment and productivity that you get out of your life.
Yeah, and my understanding that this pathway is especially helpful, I would say, or less risky than just taking exogenous testosterone directly, right? Because this allows your body to endogenously produce testosterone.
Yes.
But essentially it's not going to shrink your testicles. Is obviously another important factor that I'm sure that you care about for optimizing longevity and happiness and all of that.
Yeah, you're exactly right. It's essentially, signaling your body to produce more testosterone rather than just taking some exogenously. Yep.
Yeah. What else is interesting? I mean, I think the lithium, the SSRIs, the MDMA is interesting. So obviously, some of these compounds that we're talking about are either some of them are completely reasonable in supplements and in foods. Some are prescriptions, so you need to have a doctor that you're working with, and some are, just scheduled, compounds like MDMA. So if it's illegal in your country or territory, please don't break the law. But with that said, I'm curious. Obviously, I think with that caveat said, there's a lot of emerging research around MDMA being really promising as a therapeutic for PTSD, anxiety, and obviously from a subjective effect from recreational use. Most people will report that it is a very sociable feeling. I'm curious
So
how do you experiment and how do you introduce it into your life in a productive way?
So what I did is I wanted to be more extroverted. I'm naturally an introvert, so sometimes it's hard to kind of open conversations with new people and empathize with people in a good way, etc. I just felt that that was, to some extent, making my life less interesting and making it harder for me to maintain a network of relationships. And at some point, a friend of mine essentially invited me together with a bunch of his friends to try some MDMA. And we did that. And the experience can be described as several things. First of all, your inner voice completely goes silent. So essentially, you don't have that self-narrative of, oh, what am I going to talk to Geoff about on the podcast tomorrow? Or, oh my God, yesterday I should have said this to Geoff on the podcast. That kind of thing. We think about those things all the time, and they kind of get us out of the moment. So that's one thing. Another thing is that your essentially all your social fears completely vanish. From small ones, like, when you're having a conversation, there's a pause in the conversation. You feel uncomfortable, you have to say something, etc. That's gone. People giving you feedback and you feeling defensive about it to protect your ego, that's gone. Essentially, put it this way, it feels really nice to touch people. And at some point, I was hugging a girl who was at this event, and we just had this awesome conversation. And then I kind of stopped, this was like hour and a half. And then I see her husband sitting right there. And I'm like, dude, is it okay that I'm like, really intimately hugging your wife for the last hour and a half? And he's like, well, no, yeah, it's okay. Well, actually, I was jealous, but I felt like she was making your experience better. And I didn't want to admit that I was jealous. So this kind of thing.
Was he also on MDMA as well?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
so everyone is okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And essentially, so you pass, so you can take it a couple times in a row. So you take it, there's 4 hours of effect, you can take it again, etc. And by the way, so there's a lot of important safety protocols.
Right, the definitely diminishing effects. I mean, I think people that go to use it recreationally have pretty good sort of rule of thumbs.
You don't want to do that. So first of all, you want to research safety. It's you have to drink a lot of water, for example. But so the cool thing about my experience is that this whole experience of this kind of connection with other people and being completely open about your feelings, it stayed after the MDMA, and it stayed for many months actually. So afterwards, I found it easy to send a message to someone who I was a business partner with, and we had a falling out, and I wanted to restore the relationship. And I sent him a message saying that I admit that it was my fault to a significant extent, and our relationship is important. Let's recover it.
Right.
It's become much easier to, that's one example. It's become much easier to, do things to do with sex. I mean, essentially, I was with a girl, and I was like, hey, let's tape some videos. And she was like, oh, why didn't you ask before? And I'm like, I was shy. So, and that kind of thing is also very, so you feel like that social embarrassment is gone. It's easy. So it's super easy for me to, I don't know, if there's a cute girl in the elevator, I'll say, hey, you're cute. And do you want to go grab coffee? And she says, oh, no, I have a husband. I'm like, that's cool. Okay. All right. Have a nice evening. And I don't feel bad at all about the experience, even though it's kind of like, oh, she turned me down.
Right. So that's interesting. So essentially, yeah, that experience that was assisted with a compound really opened you up into a new behavioral context that you can just
Yes.
apply without using the compound, which is awesome, right? Like I think that's like probably one of the most beneficial ways to use some of these interventions, right? Like you just experience a new state, and you realize that's possible. And if you have sort of the strong enough will and discipline, you can recreate that state without using a drug, which I think is a very,
Right.
thoughtful approach to doing
And
something
it's
like this.
part of it, it's almost like coaching. So, essentially your tennis coach takes you by the hands
Right.
and the legs and makes the perfect swing a bunch of times, and you find you enjoy it and you understand how to do it. And
Right.
then it's easy to do it again.
Yeah.
So that's something that has been a very cool experience.
Yeah. That's a great anecdote in series there. I know a lot of our community members in We Fast and in our fasting community are big, big people, big fasters, big ketogenic diet adherents. Curious to hear your experience and journey there. Are you measuring your glucose ketone levels? Curious to hear about the diet side of
Sure.
your protocol.
Sure. So the diet I try to adhere to is kind of ketogenic. So mostly plant fats and more of a plant diet, but
Mhm.
not entirely plant-based. So I also eat occasionally meat and a lot of salmon. So I try to go for a fairly keto high diet. I don't measure ketones on a daily basis. I measure them occasionally, and I usually get fairly high glucose ketone, fairly good glucose ketone ratios. So after a 16-hour fast, I'll probably get to 3.5 millimolar of ketones and
Really?
maybe 3.5 to 4 of glucose.
That's quite
So
high, but you're eating pretty ketogenic. Like
I
on.
eat not perfectly, actually.
Okay.
I think that part of it has to do with the fact that I also fast quite often.
Okay.
So I fast probably 3 or 4 times a week for 24 hours.
Okay.
So I just usually there's many days where I feel like I don't want to eat until the evening, so I essentially fasted for 24 hours.
Right.
I'm not religious about any of this. It depends on how I feel that particular day. But I found that fasting isn't just a healthy way of living. It also makes things more simple. So you don't have to spend time on eating,
Yeah.
and you actually do waste a lot of time if you eat 3 times a day. I find that I'm smarter and less kind of I have less of an afternoon slump, like
Yep.
that feeling after lunch where
Yep.
you feel like you're not doing anything.
Yep.
So I don't have that at all, essentially. Plus, the food in the evening tastes really, really, really good.
Yeah.
So that's the reason that I kind of like fasting a lot.
Yeah.
And one of the cool thing that's come out of it is I did this test called respiratory quotient, which
Yeah.
is you have a gas exchange mask, like kind of what you do for Vo2 Max, and it shows you what your body is burning in a steady state, kind of a calm state when you're
Right.
sitting. And I found that, so for me, that marker is 0.71, which means that I'm in steady state burning almost 100% fat.
Yep.
And I actually switched to glucose only kind of around 150 heartbeats per minute. And that's also correlated with a lot of beneficial things like low insulin resistance, essentially, etc. So I think actually, so, we started talking about the drugs and all of those more sexy and interesting interventions, but the largest thing you can do for health are more the basic
Yep.
things. And I would start really with food, and certainly with eliminating dietary sugar, with eliminating processed foods, and with eliminating kind of non-organic animal products. So
Absolutely. I think that's what I tell all the reporters and all the people that ask. Like, there's some low hanging fruit. If you're like not exercising, if you're sleeping like 2 hours a day, and are eating just junk food all the day, like though, if you like to just improve that, your life is gonna markedly change. Like, there's just 100% guarantee that's gonna work. But if once you're there and you want to keep eking out more performance, then talk to folks like Serge and start geeking out about all the things you can do. But I agree. I think the RQ quotient is a really nice biometric that it shows that you're fully in a fat burning state. Because I think a lot of people in our community will ask, oh, like, am I doing keto right? I'm eating or I'm fasting, but they're not really measuring the outcomes. And I think that's a very important part of biohacking. It's not just doing stuff, it's about measuring it as well. And I think, like, yeah, an RQ of 0.7 is like very, very good. I mean, if you're just starting to burn glucose at 150 BPM, I mean, that's pretty high heart rate. So I mean, that suggests that you'll be pretty good at like long distance running, because if you can keep your heart rate below 150, you're completely burning fat. You're not generating any lactic acid. You're just cruising. I mean, are you doing like long endurance running and all of that, or are you doing mostly high intensity interval training?
So I used to actually. It's really funny. I used to run long distance endurance since I was probably 14 or 15 years old, and all the way through to my 27% body fat. So, and I think now that long distance endurance running and long distance endurance exercises of any kind are not really that useful. So we've discussed this with my doctors at length, and the conclusion seemed to be that you really only want to do two things if in exercise. One is high intensity interval training of some sort. So I do essentially, a bunch of HIIT runs outside usually, or sometimes on the treadmill if it's too bad outside. And it's just, 15, 20 minutes, and you get a lot of benefit from it. And the other bit is heavy hip hinge exercises in the gym. And this is also something that's a very cool insight. When you do things like deadlifts or leg press or squats, you're loading a large set of very large muscles that are far away from your heart. So you have to pump through a lot more nutrients through the system than if you just do some biceps curls. So essentially, just the yield of metabolic benefits, of hormone benefits per rep of exercise is vastly greater. So you really want to focus on that.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think I'm curious. Like for myself, I think I go back and forth in terms of just mixing HIIT training and powerlifting with endurance, because I think that like if you have a limited amount of time, probably doing HIIT is the most efficient yield. But my sense is that you want to build up a strong aerobic base as well. If you can run for 3 hours and burn through your glycogen stores, I think you do both if you can do both. But obviously, running for 3 hours takes a lot more time than like doing HIIT for 20 minutes.
Fair enough. I haven't done that recently, but I think in general running is enjoyable. It's just like a nice meditation almost. So I'm there with you to do it and to do it occasionally just for fun and to kind of diversify your exercise routine.
Yeah, because I think that there's some literature that I should bring that up, but suggesting that like long aerobic exercises in the aerobic range are beneficial for longevity and increasing BDNF, but that might just be related to ketone production, because a lot of these pathways end up overlapping. So you might be able to replicate some of those findings with heavy HIIT, and you start burning through all your glycogen by doing HIIT, and then you get into a ketotic state anyways. So I think it is sort of an interesting area of exploration, whether you would just do just HIIT, just endurance, or a mix of both. My sense is that probably a mix of both, triggering heavy loads and then lighter loads over a longer period of times, seems to be covering all bases. But I think if you want to be strictly efficient on time, it sounds like 20 minutes of HIIT. Like people out there that aren't doing that, you'd be like, oh, I could definitely sprint for 2 minutes at a time with like 50-second breaks. No, you will. If you do it right, you will be like throwing up. If you like close to throwing up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you want to feel sick at the end of this. And by the way, so one interesting thing that I noticed is that so my Vo2 Max in particular has gone quite high. Specifically,
what is your Vo2 Max?
It's like over 70. Which is very, very high. That's so 70? High that usually 70, yeah.
Oh, 7 liters.
70.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's based on liters, right? I think that was.
No. It's milliliters per kilogram of body weight.
Okay.
But usually it's actually, I don't have any athletic achievements whatsoever. But that's a Vo2 Max that's close to kind of like Olympic athletes. And I did not have that before I started doing a lot of HIIT.
Yeah.
in fact, it's so high that people usually think I'm lying about this, and I have to like post screenshots of these, crazy
Yeah,
tests
no,
and
that's interesting because I was and I was seeing some of the results from our research lead, who's a double world champion rower. She's a woman, so she's naturally gonna have a smaller VO2 max. But I think she was saying that she was around 4.0 or 4.1. So
I think we're just measuring in
and
slightly different
yeah,
units,
I
but yeah,
believe it's liters. So if you convert her body weight or your body weight
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. So you divide that, yeah, something like that.
yeah, okay,
Anyway,
yeah,
it doesn't matter, but it seems like VO2 max is an interesting metric for kind of measuring your overall fitness of your body and your kind of cardio and
yeah.
lung system.
Yeah, so for folks that don't know what VO2 max is, essentially a measure of how much oxygen your body can uptake. So the more you can sort of uptake, theoretically you can spend that more. And obviously for oxygen is a required substrate for aerobic metabolism. I mean, that's why we breathe. We need oxygen to fuel our brain and body. Um, that's it. I mean, it's also interesting from not just from a enhancement perspective, but you were able to also, look at something like mercury and realize that hey, you're kind of dosing up on mercury, which is bad for cognition, and we're correcting for that. Now, how many things in your exploration over the last 5 years, how many things would you say would be focused on enhancement? How many would you say are focused on essentially like a therapeutic?
Well, see, I actually don't think there's much of a difference
I
because
agree. I agree. I think it's a false dichotomy.
it is. I think this is something, this is a great phrase from Yuval Harari's book, Homo Deus, which I highly recommend. But he essentially argues that medicine is upgrading and not healing, rather that healing and upgrading are the same
Yeah.
thing. So let me give you an example. I have vision that is better than 2020 in terms of just reading those eye charts. But I wear glasses that still give some a level of correction, and it gets me down to, I think, either 2013 or 1320. I can't remember how they go, which way around they go. And that essentially is improving me over some baseline, which someone in their wisdom has defined as the human average standard.
Yeah.
So medicine has upgraded me to an above human level,
Right.
and you can do this with a lot of things. I usually wear hearing aids, even though my hearing isn't that bad. I mean, maybe it's a little worse than the average person. And I tune those, and there's really cool hearing aids out there now. Like there's ones that are Bluetooth that are invisible that you can through your iPhone change from lecture hall mode to nightclub mode that filter out human voice from background noise with machine learning
That's
techniques,
interesting.
etc.
I want to look into that. So, yeah, do you
You
have any
should.
cool
It's awesome.
stories? Yeah, do you have any
Um,
cool stories where like people were talking behind your back and you're like, "What?" Or any funny stories about like that?
I mean, not something as strange as that,
Yeah.
but what happened is when I started wearing it, I actually noticed that there are some things which I've never heard before in my life, like things like the rustling of like a particular plastic bag or some silly things like that, that I started noticing. I'm like, whoa, I haven't ever heard that before in my
Yeah.
life. So, and it was the same with glasses actually. So you suddenly are like, whoa, so those edges are slightly more beautiful than I thought.
Yeah, a
So it
little
just
bit more
makes your
crisp.
life
Yeah.
it just makes your life a little bit better. And there's a lot of cool technology that's coming out. I think one of the manufacturers of hearing aids is also manufacturing small little microphones that you can put, for example, around your apartment, and you can have stereo hearing of your entire house when you're inside there. I'm not sure how you don't
Interesting.
go crazy because
Yeah.
that must be such a weird experience. But this
Yeah.
is just an example of the kind of technology. And with time, I think a lot of what I believe is that with time, this is all going to give huge, huge social advantages to people who exploit those technologies. So
Right.
let me give you a couple of examples that are fictional, but that I would love to pay for if someone created them. Maybe someone hearing this
Yeah.
will. One is just there are those continuous glucose monitoring tools. So like Dexcom and Libra, I know you guys are fans.
Yeah.
If someone created essentially a CGM for testosterone and combined it with a pump for testosterone that is implanted and allowed you to control your testosterone in real time, ideally also from an app on your phone, where let's say that you want to be aggressive in a negotiation when you're talking to someone,
Yep.
and 15 minutes before you're like, more aggression.
Yep.
And that turns up testosterone. Or, whatever, before sex, or you turn it down before you want to go to sleep.
Yeah.
So that I would pay a lot of money for. And from what I understand, in particular with the testosterone molecule, is quite possible. Another example, this is going to sound kind of almost creepy, but so there's fairly good technologies out there for analysis of voice and faces. In particular, for voice, there are technologies already that analyze whether the person is angry or happy,
Detecting
etc.
tells, detecting lies, detecting uncomfortableness.
Yes, exactly. So now they use it in just like call centers for
Right.
analyzing sentiment, customer sentiment. But if you could go around with a little microphone/camera somewhere, and a bunch of little vibrating electrodes or something somewhere on your shoulder, working on the cochlear implant principle, where if you send the body a consistent signal, it learns to associate it with a certain
Right.
thing. And then have that camera and microphone detect the faces that come in front of you, detect their emotions, detect when people get upset, detect when their pulse goes much higher, because you can actually do that with a good enough camera and machine learning.
Infrared, right? You can see the blood pulsing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you could it's almost like it would be a distinct enhancement of your emotional intelligence, your EQ, because you would instantly be able to understand a little bit when the person you're talking to is lying, or when you said something that made them uncomfortable,
Or you can read
when
micro
you said
expressions, right? You can
Exactly.
hear quivers in the voice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing would give a huge advantage, because, I mean, so much of human society and of business is based on kind of a level playing field in terms of those things. And once you can do this, you gain more resources that you can then reinvest into doing more and more and more of these things.
No, I think that's really awesome, because I remember I was thinking about similar things. Like, what if you had contact lenses that was able to read micro expressions and then have that as like a dashboard? He's like 40% uncomfortable, 60% untruthful.
Yeah.
That's super interesting, right? And I think that is an inevitable technology. And then riffing off of your first point, I think that's like the holy grail of biohacking. You have continuous feedback loops, right? Like, we can manipulate computers very, very precisely. You want more RAM chips, you can talk to Amazon, spin up an additional box.
Yep.
Why can't we do that with our human inputs? Why can't we do it with testosterone, as this one example? I think that I think it stands to reason that will exist in the future. Like,
of course, and you have to also recognize that the things we do right now with biohacking are actually so primitive to what's really going on inside the body. Some guy goes and does a test at best, maybe 4 times a year, and maybe that night he was stressed or slept a little worse, etc. And there's so much noise in the data. But the cool thing about CGM is that it really gamifies your whole life experience. And I'd love to see a lot more proteins that can be analyzed that way in real time and actions taken on them. That's going to be a very big advantage.
Absolutely. I think that you see some pickup in the media with articles around biohackers in Silicon Valley, which I know I've been a part of a lot of those discussions. But I think it's early. I think people think it's half snake oil, half maybe speculative. Like, what is the real performance metrics? But I think when people like kind of see your results, I think you have like very, very strong data on your personal biometrics. And I think as these technologies get more prevalent and people speak up more about it, you will see just different performances over time, right? Like, if you just have N equals 5 of biohackers, like, it's hard to tease out whether maybe Serge, you're maybe just a smart person in general. Maybe you would have made $1 billion regardless of all your biohacking. But there's 1,000 of people doing, N equals 1 personal experience like yourself, and 990 of you are billionaires. Okay, this is something that's really freaking real, right? I think that's the tipping point when it's like, oh, maybe Serge is just a smart guy. Maybe Geoff is just like a really good, smart person. And he's just successful because he's just naturally smart. And then biohacking was kind of like an add-on. Once it tips, we're like, hey, these are just is a very significant contributing factor to success. I think that will, shit hits the fan. It's like very real now.
I think partially the challenge is just the fact that our biology is of great complexity.
Yeah.
And it's really, really hard. Like, there's no doctor out there, even the most sophisticated doctors, who can really tell you, hey, here's the magic thing you have to do, which is going to be perfect for you. You actually, at this point, really have to dig in and understand it yourself. And not everyone just has, I don't know, the inclination, the time, the ability to focus for a long period of time on an unfamiliar subject to really dig into this. So
I agree. I think that people like yourself, people like what we do at Human, I think we are making it easier for people to understand, right? Like, I think you really have a good template. Like, it's like, these are some of the key biometrics that you should look at, and here's some interventions that have worked for myself. Like, you kind of spent a lot of time debugging your own process to some interesting results. I think my sense is that, yes, as any early phase, there will be people exploring and doing some crazy stuff. People might hurt themselves, and it's probably likely if you're just doing all sorts of crazy stuff. But I think you're actually very thoughtful, and it sounds like you have some good professional medical advisors advising you on it. And I think that's like a good pathway for people to look at and follow.
And it was surprising that this is actually, so the article I wrote became actually a lot more popular than I thought it would be. So about 200,000 people have read the article. We posted a Russian translation on the Russian version of TechCrunch yesterday, and their site crashed from the traffic because it got picked up by like the radio talk shows, etc. So that was kind of funny.
That's awesome. So everyone's gonna be like copying your protocol now. I mean, I think it is. I think it's a very good protocol. And I remember doing a similar protocol myself, doing my urine, saliva, stool, urine test. I think it's like, and we got like thousands of tens of thousands of views on that as well. I think it is a sign that like people care about this stuff, right? Like I think it is like, the 200,000 people that read your article, let's say 1% of them, 2,000 of them are going to try some of this stuff. Yeah. And that's a lot of people doing a lot of experiments now.
And I actually found that, so I've given talks at my company before and to some tech entrepreneurs in Russia. I actually found there was quite a high percentage of people then started trying to do something. And that's a really nice feeling because, Geoff, what you're doing and what I'm doing, it helps some people become healthier. Maybe some of them will catch some kind of cancer early on and be able to cure it. Yeah. Or they will be able to just make a change that makes their life better. So that's a very cool feeling. And I think it's great that you guys are doing a lot to educate people.
Yeah, absolutely.
About this.
One thing I think about it, I think this is like a populist revolution within healthcare. I think you were just saying that the existing healthcare is like fucked up, right? Like I think, especially in America, there's Obamacare, Trump care. People want to repeal this and that. Like politics aside, no one even knows what the hell is going on, but no one's like really happy with it. And I think what we're doing is we're empowering people to understand and take control of their own health and their own performance into their own hands. And I think with sensors, with data, people can actually do that.
Yeah, and also, if part of the problem, we kind of blamed the insurance company and the doctors on this podcast, but part of the problem is that sick people mostly go to the doctors. People don't really think about their health until they have a problem.
Right.
And that's the reason why doctors are, when you come in with very suboptimal metrics, but they're like, oh, this is nothing like all the people who have like a triple bypass surgery that I see on a daily basis.
Yeah, you're fine. Yeah. You're not actually fine.
I actually, so this is funny. I went, before I really got into biohacking, I went to a doctor and said, hey, doctor, I noticed that my mercury level is really elevated. And he was like, well, I'm not sure what to do with that. Well, you don't have any symptoms. Like if your hair starts falling out, you should come back. But like now, I don't think you should do anything. Like, what? I
Yeah.
don't want fucking hair to fall out.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
That seems silly, right? It's like, yeah, wait until like you have your arm broken and then come back. It's like, no, no, let's prevent that.
And
Absolutely.
also, let's keep in mind that the three key classes of diseases that people actually die from, so atherosclerosis, cancer, and neurodegenerative disease, these are all lifelong processes.
Yep.
These are not one-time events.
Yep.
So by the time, the reason and I think you do all this stuff with ketogenic, etc., is that we know there are cancer cells in our bodies, even though we're kind of in our 30s or pretty young.
You're right.
There are cancer cells appearing every day
Yep.
in our bodies, and then it's just a continuous, lifelong statistical process. And by the time you have symptoms, the system is kind of rotten. It's impossible to fix
Yeah.
in some respects. So preventative medicine really is the only way to handle these metabolic lifelong disorders.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah, and
this
we had
is
we had
not
we had
understood.
Thomas Siegfried, who's one of the leading proponents around a metabolic theory of cancer on our show, and he speaks a lot towards that. I'm curious from the transparency side. So I think that's an interesting, I guess, personality hack that you wanted to install with all your biometric hacking. I'm curious. How'd you come to that decision? Like, I think it is very brave and open to talk about your sex life and all your crazy hardcore, fairly personal biometrics. I'm curious why that approach.
So I think it started with just seeing how good it felt on MDMA to be honest with people
Yeah,
and not have those games that we usually play with
yeah,
each other and the mask that you wear to other people. And then I started just noticing other people doing the same things all the time, when they put up their awesome Instagram photo, and then you see in the restaurant how that person is spending like 25 or 30 minutes
yeah,
perfectly trying to catch
yeah,
the angle and make themselves look happy to their online audience.
yeah,
So it started with that. But then I read this awesome book by Sam Harris, who has an amazing podcast that I highly recommend, called Lying, where he made an argument, a very persuasive argument, that you should always tell the truth at all times, except fantastic situations like Nazis coming to your door looking for Anne Frank, which never really happened to anyone in real life. And
right,
he was saying that, hey, if your friend asks you, do I look fat in this dress? And she does, you owe it to her to say, yes, you do. And actually, she will trust your opinion more in the future if you have said something that no other person would actually say, that everyone else would lie about.
right.
Or, your kids will lose trust in you if you tell them that Santa Claus is real and then they discover that he's
He's not
not.
right.
They will say, like, what else has he been lying to me about?
Yeah, he's not
So,
reliable anymore. Yeah,
yeah, he's not reliable anymore. And essentially, I started thinking, and I realized that I lie a lot about like super silly things sometimes. Like, I don't want to go somewhere, and instead of saying, hey, dude, I'm just tired and I don't feel like going, I'm going to be, a bad sport, I just invent something about how I have like, a food poisoning. So just because it feels easier
right.
that way. And I've done a lot of like just things where I would lie about things, some of them more major. I mean, at one point in life, I lied about being 1 year younger because I wanted to look more cool to other people. I achieved more by like a particular age.
Yeah,
And none of these things made my life better in any way.
right.
And I was having dinner with a friend last night, and we discussed this, and then he and I both told each other some things about our personalities that we found problematic and annoying. And we wouldn't have done that if we didn't have this kind of radical transparency discussion. And it's
Yeah,
helping me, it's helping him, and it also makes you feel that your relationship with people is is just closer.
I think
And then,
I think it's really cool. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
and
I
then,
think you're actually learning faster, right? If you can give
yes.
blunter feedback and people are giving you blunter feedback, that's how you actually learn and adapt and improve.
Absolutely. And then on sex, I mean, this is such an annoying kind of area of life in terms of how society treats it, because
Yeah.
society just keeps saying that like everything's embarrassing about it. And actually, sex is such a large part of the algorithm of evolution that it's not surprising that it's a large part of our mental health, and that I spend a lot of time every day thinking about it.
Yeah, for both men and women, right? Like
Yeah.
I think it is. Yeah, it is like a silly thing to realize that like, hey, people feel uncomfortable talking about it, but yes, there's like attractive people that one would find sexual interest in, like in this universe. I mean, we in some levels are programmed as organisms to do that.
Yes, of course.
Yeah,
And also, I just noticed that some of my friends who are very close and who kind of, are free to share intimate things with me, they just say, hey, like I love my wife, but I want to have sex with other women. So either I cheat and I feel bad about, breaking trust with someone who you're supposed to have trust with, or I'm sexually frustrated. So, and I just kind of said to myself at some point, fuck this. So I feel like there's an important thing to be like super open with this as well. And that way it's not as embarrassing. No one can come to you with like a political revelation someday that this guy is like, sleeping with someone, because it's already out in the open.
yeah.
You might as well be. And it also is much more, you discover cool people who are saying, hey, I'm totally in agreement with you and into this. So
Yeah.
it's more authentic. It's nicer to live life that way. And I think it's more mentally healthy.
I agree. I think if you're telling the truth, you have one story to tell. If you have a lot of lies going on, you're making your life complicated by having like a set story for set circumstances. So I agree.
Yeah.
I think I think I would say we could all ascribe to be closer and closer to the truth, right? You're just making your own life simpler.
Yeah. One of my favorite phrases in which I've heard this described was essentially kind of, you want your private self and your public self to be as close to each other as possible.
That's
so there's
like
no
a
gap.
truly self-actualization. Like you are presenting
Yeah.
yourself truly to the world.
Yeah.
I
Exactly.
want to move into some audience questions. Eli Quinton asks, what do you think about adding implants? So we had Neil Harbison on recently, and he's a guy with an antenna that detects different wavelengths of light. So he's colorblind, but he can sense and through vibration, infrared to ultraviolet to different colors of visible light. Is that something you're interested in? I mean, it sounds like a lot of your things are sort of endogenous compounds, but it doesn't sound like you have done too much with
Well,
implants.
not too much, but I've been thinking about it a lot. And actually, my question is, so obviously, because of the neuroplasticity of the human brain, you can, you can add any sense you want as long as you have an external sensor
All right.
and you have some kind of electric impulse that transduces it into your nervous system.
Right.
So the question is, what senses are going to be useful, right? So is it useful to have an altitude sensor? Probably not.
Yeah, I think
Is
it's
it
a game.
useful?
Yeah.
So the biggest thing I thought of was that it would be useful to have things that give you an advantage in society, and these things are mostly social in nature. And that's actually how I came up with the idea of, hey, let's have the facial and voice analysis sense, because that kind of just gives you a better sense of just kind of almost a subconsciously better sense of emotional intelligence of what the other person is saying, of empathy.
Yeah.
Or mind reading, if you want to go the creepy dystopian
Right.
interpretation. So I think there's a lot of interesting implants stories that are going to happen. Right now, it seems like it's mostly people tinkering with just cool stuff. I think I read about a guy who had magnets implanted into his fingertips so he could detect electrical fields
Yeah,
like
it's a little bit
wires in the
gimmicky. A
walls.
little bit gimmicky. I think
Yeah,
that's
I
gimmicky.
just,
Yeah.
yeah, the question is, hey, what's going to be very useful for our everyday life? I think it's got to be either enhancing our own senses, so things that, like really awesome hearing aids. I think there's going to come, actually, everyone's hearing compared to the baseline when the baseline was established, which was like 150 years ago when the field of audiology started, everyone's hearing is depressed. So essentially, you're actually, by using hearing aids, you're kind of coming back to the normal human level of hearing. And, there's obviously other senses that you could potentially attach. There's whatever gets data to your brain faster from the internet. And then I think a lot of the future is in CGM-like devices that monitor various proteins in your blood and that take actions and decisions automatically on that basis. So it feels like that whole part is just getting started, but there's a lot of potential.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's similar to how I think about it. There's a lot of gimmicks in art projects, and I think that will really become mainstream or interesting to someone like myself when it's like, hey, I only want to implant something into my body if it's gonna give me some distinct enhancement advantage. Otherwise, like I can use a wearable, I can use a temporary implant or something to like have a nice toy or have a nice gimmick. But until it's like a distinct advantage I want for an extended period of time, then let's get the technology there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Conrad Utterback asks, what is the most important nootropic in your opinion? I noticed that in your supplements list, you have some components that form some of our nootropic stacks, like Rise. You have Bacopa Monnieri. So you have using some of the things in our nootropic stacks. I'm curious, what has been the most helpful for yourself?
So let's say that nootropic is about increasing your intelligence.
Correct.
And intelligence is the ability to solve complex problems.
Yeah.
So I feel like whatever gives you the ability to focus and work better on solving problems. I think for me, that's Modafinil. And I've taken Adderall for a long time as well, but it has some undesirable side effects. Like it makes you too tunnel visiony and a little too anxious for my liking.
Right.
Modafinil, I think, is the number one. And then I also think of Lithium and SSRI as nootropics as well, even though they don't meet the classical definition.
Right.
Lithium makes you calmer and more stress resistant, which effectively allows you to concentrate better. And that effectively allows, that's effective intelligence.
Right.
Plus, there's a lot of evidence that lithium is actually causing neurogenesis, that lithium has nice positive effects on the brain. So one of my doctors used to be a neurobiologist at Stanford, and he was saying that they actually used lithium to treat people with brain damage, and they saw, and there wasn't like a lot of published material around this, but that they saw improvement in neurogenesis of brain damaged patients. And then escitalopram, the SSRI I use, it also it just makes your mood, makes everything a little bit better every day. And so it's easier to motivate yourself to work. You don't have bad days, etc. So I think of those as nootropics as well. The general stack of supplements, the more classic supplements like Bacopa Monnieri, I started so many of those at once because I was just like, at some point, I was just like, hey, I'm going to go on examine.com and find everything that I think is interesting.
Right.
And I do feel like there's been an improvement, but I don't have the attribution.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think yes. If you're doing you're adding 20 variables at once, it's hard to tease out what is working or what is not.
Yeah.
But I think that some of the things that I think have the strongest data and what we've seen work in our customers, I think you have some of them like Bacopa within your stacks, which is cool.
That's certainly very well supported. I think in my post, I also listed my doctor's research team essentially went through a lot of data, and we listed at the top the ones that
have the most
seem
data,
to have the best support, and Bacopa was one of them. Generally, I think the recommendations that you guys give are excellent.
Yeah,
so.
No, appreciate that. Cool. Any other points? I mean, I think that's a really interesting conversation covering a broad gamut of things. I think it is interesting to hear your personal journey as an entrepreneur, looking to optimize yourself and then go on this sort of virtuous feedback cycle to become even more effective, to have even more sort of wealth and access to be even more effective, and eventually, hopefully, living forever and being a part of this singularity future that that a lot of people are sort of hypothesizing will happen. I love that. I think that, I think a lot of our people are going to be super interested in hearing this, and I'm sure that we'll get you back on the show, because I think Zill, like, I think we'll probably see a lot of interesting feedbacks and questions, and like, hey, what do you think about this and that and that? So we'll get the link of that blog post. It's a great post, very, very thorough in terms of the blood measures, the urine measures, all the different measures that one could even want to do, more money than you can spend on all these tests, and then some interventions. And then I think just the added disclaimer, some of the things that we talked about, do require doctor's prescriptions, or are just, problematic to hold in possession in certain jurisdictions. So be careful about that. Until next time, it's great to have you on the show, Serge.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the show. Thanks for taking the time. And really, I think the takeaway message should be just that, human enhancement is not the distant future. It's already here now. You can take advantage of it and become, better yourself in a variety of ways. And I also think that people should be paying attention to it as a social concern, because it has a much greater potential for inequality than kind of the hot topic issues of the day, like, gender pay disparity. I mean, I'm all for people fighting for gender pay equality, but that's nothing compared to what the world will look like if there are going to be some people who are very enhanced and a lot of people who cannot catch up. And that's a world that's coming very, very, very soon. Anyway, so thanks for having me on this podcast. It was awesome to meet you over video, and, we'll meet
hang out in person
at some point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
Thank you, guys.
Cool.
All right.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Awesome. And as always, subscribe, follow us on @Human. We're on YouTube, SoundCloud, Facebook, Google Play, iTunes, any other channels we're missing. As always, it's great to have questions for our guests. Please do ping us on that. Awesome discussion. I'm excited to have and catch up with Serge again. Cheers. See you next time.